Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this CG Pro live info session. Live if you're watching it live, not if you're watching the recording. But welcome. It's great to have you all here. And tonight we're going to be focused on Blender. So tonight is all about Blender. We have two amazing Blender artists with us tonight. So we're going to be talking about Blender a lot, and we'll do some intros in a second. But yeah, we're CG Pro, and we're a school, and we are going to be talking about Blender. We're going to be going through some demos and some instructional content tonight, but also there is going to be a presentation about a new Blender course that we have coming up. So stick around towards the end if you're interested in that. We'll talk about a little bit more about that when we get towards the end. So let me just first introduce these fine folks here. We have Alex Pearce and Mike Hodgetts with us tonight. They are instructors in the course and good friends, and we'll do a proper intro to them in a second. But let me just first share the screen here. So, little overview for the evening. So we've got Blender intro and demo coming up first. We've then a little discussion and some examples of Blender content, Blender projects that Alex has worked on. And we then have the course presentation, and we have a Q&A at the end. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. This is an interactive session. So if you guys out there in the audience have questions, please post them whenever you feel like it. If we can, we'll bring them up during the session. And if not, we'll definitely get to those in the Q&A, and we'll stick around. Make sure we answer your questions. So here we have introductions. I'm going to go first. Tonight's not really about me, so I'm just going to get that out of the way quickly. But my name's Ed Dawson-Taylor. I am co-founder of CG Pro. Been a CG supervisor and CG artist for about the last 15 years or so, and I've had the fortune to work for some really cool companies along the way, like ILM, NBC, Digital Domain. Worked on The Lion King and Jungle Book and Jurassic World, and did a bunch of other things previous to that. I was a software engineer and been a teacher for quite some time. I've taught a bunch of things, and leading up to creating our own school, which is CG Pro. So that is me. Here we have Alex Pearce. Great to have you with us tonight, Alex. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You want me to give me my little intro, my spiel here?
Please do.
So I'm Alex Pearce. I'm a partner here at Lightsail VR. Here I'm also the senior creative technologist, and I oversee all the technical stuff at Lightsail. And Lightsail is a very technical company. We do a lot of very high tech stuff, so that actually kind of goes a long way. I've been using Blender for probably 6 or 7 years now, and I used it in lots of different ways. Sometimes for small 3D things. I'm using it now for a lot of virtual production stuff, and I've used it on high end, with big clients like Meta. We're going to show you one of those projects tonight. I've used it from start to finish, where you model and render and composite, and do everything in Blender, and the whole thing. So big Blender fan, has been for a long time.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And we also have the pleasure of having Mike with us too.
Yeah, I can go through my side as well. As I said, my name's Mike Hodgetts. Again, thanks for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this. I've been using Blender for probably, coming up 20 years now.
Wow.
Started using Blender in 2005, very much as a hobbyist. Managed to turn that into a career. The majority of the work that I do is within the AI sector, working on generating synthetic data sets for AI training models, exclusively using Blender. And for the last year, 18 months, I've been working very closely with Alex at Lightsail as Lightsail's lead 3D artist. Again, primarily just using Blender. So yeah, really looking forward to jumping into all this.
Me too. Thank you, Mike. 20 years in Blender. Wow. I mean, I remember downloading it a long time ago, and I was using Maya mainly at that point, and I think really it was like 2.8 that brought me into Blender as well. And yeah, really amazing that you've been in it that long.
It's certainly come a hell of a long way. You know, I mean, I think when I started using it, it was like 1.7 or something like that. So, you know, seeing how far it's come and just, I mean, it now looks and it is a professional software. Whereas I think, you know, back in the day, it very much wasn't. But yeah, it's brilliant to see, you know, the community kind of really take off and make that change from hobbyists tool into being, you know, professional level software.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And hearing more and more people in high up in the industry telling us that it's being used in productions, and yeah, it's a very, very, very great tool. So let's get stuck in. Thank you for the introduction, Mike. Great to have you here. So yeah, first up we have talking about Blender, and I had to stop myself from saying Unreal there. Blender, talking about Blender in depth. And Alex, I know you're going to take the lead on this section, so
Sure.
let me know if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, we can go ahead and share my screen.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, so you know, a very brief history of Blender. It started in the late '80s, '89, and it became open source in 2002. And then the next big thing that happened in 2019, there was a massive overhaul to 2.8, and that sort of changed. It changed a lot for everyone. You know, I think probably if you're watching this, you probably have some sort of idea of what Blender is, and you probably know some of the background. But if you're a newer 3D artist, you might not know that basically for a long time, it was kind of the joke of the 3D industry. It was sort of like there were diehard people who used it, and they used it for very specific things. And it was being used in professional settings in very specific places. But in general, no one ever really considered it a serious tool. Certainly not the major studios and that sort of thing. And over time, that has changed slowly and slowly until now, where I think everybody, any 3D artist who's there's a 3D artist out there, they've tried Blender, if nothing else, and a lot of people have switched over. A lot of people, you know, 5 years ago, including myself, switched over because they sort of felt like they had to, either because they couldn't afford it or, you know, Maya or these other ones. But now it's really it's not just that it's cheap or free. It's that it's a better tool. In so many cases, it ends up being a better tool, and it's such a vast program with so many different areas that the efficiencies to be able to do some modeling, then jump in and do some sculpting, then jump in and do some texturing, then render the whole thing, composite the whole thing, edit the whole thing, is really, there's nothing quite like it. So it's still changing very rapidly, and I think growing even more so than before. And a big part of that is all the sponsorships now. They have a lot of corporate sponsorships that really help them. So, Mike, do you want to add anything? I know you've been with Blender for quite a while. So do you want to add anything on that?
I think you know the big leap was the move from, you know, the introduction to the 2.8 series. I mean, we can see just there, you know, Blender's now on 3.5 as the official release. But I think, you know, when it moved from going from like 2.79 to 2.8, that was really when there was a huge leap in from the development team, and it really started to be, you know, taken seriously as a professional software. As you said, you know, it's very much the joke of the 3D industry for a very long time. But yeah, I think, you know, now it's I think one of the most powerful things about Blender, not just the fact that you can do pretty much everything within one software. Obviously, that for a lot of things and for certain areas, there is better software out there, and for some things, there's better free software out there. But the fact that you can do, like you were saying, Alex, earlier, that you can take the entire pipeline of creating a model to sculpting, texturing, animation, video editing, pretty much everything that you could imagine for a CG pipeline, you can do under one roof is really, really powerful.
Yeah. Yep. So that's the brief summary of the history of Blender. Should we jump into Blender and start looking at some stuff?
Let's do it.
All right. I've prepared this amazing scene here. And first thing, we're basically in this info session, we're just going to pretend that you've never opened Blender before, you know nothing about it. We're going to talk about some very basic concepts. We're going to look at some of the different UI elements, some of the different modes, the different tabs that you can use. And we're just going to sort of do a very broad overview here. In the course, obviously, it's over 8 weeks. We get into details about everything. And I think that real quick before we jump in, I think that Mike and I think are actually a really great team, because Mike has extensive knowledge from like what you would hope a Blender user would have. Like if you were going to hire a Blender artist, he has like all of the foundational skills. He knows everything about every single aspect of it, I would say. And me, I'm the kind of total opposite. I have the ADD skill set of Blender, where I've done some wild and crazy things, and I know like all these like very specific niche things, and I know all these add-ons, and like I know the Lego add-on, you can like do all this cool stuff. I also know a lot about the scripting pipelines, and I'm using and now I'm using ChatGPT. This is a script I did earlier just by adding just this ChatGPT. I added a code and it did this exporter. And so I think we have between the two of us, we have a very interesting skill set that's very very useful. So the first thing I want to say about the Blender UI is that, again, this is all didn't used to be this way. It used to be right click to select, and instead of left click. And and this is pretty much true from anyone who is a Blender user. At first, when you first use it, it can be very confusing. You're like, why is it this way? Why is it that way? Why are there these shortcuts to do everything? But after let's say a few months, you start going, why isn't every other software like Blender? And there's some simple examples of like, you can do math in any number box. So if I want to say multiply by 10, I can actually just do my multiplication right here in the editor. And if I want to go back to the default settings, I can just hover over this and press delete. And that's something that is so simple, but is like, oh, why doesn't every program do that? There's a lot of things like that, and we'll go through this in the first course. We're going to go through all the UI stuff. Another one that I like a lot is that if there's these caret drop downs, if you click and then hold, you can quickly collapse or uncollapse all of these views. Of course, there's the 3D viewport, and it's very similar to Unreal or these others, but the shortcuts are a little bit different. And I've got to admit, I actually have my own shortcuts that I've made that I don't recommend, especially if you're going to be doing 3D modeling in Blender. But I actually have it set up in here so I can do right-click WASD to fly around my scene like I would in Unreal. So I can actually do it that way. There's also these gadgets here in the top right corner, and usually I would say a lot of people would turn these off. If you're working on your desktop, this just gets in the way a lot of the times. But sometimes, like if you're on a laptop, this is really, really handy to be able to just click on these widgets and move around. And what I discovered earlier actually too was that I'm now using I have an iPad, and I can actually use my iPad and my Apple Pencil to do my sculpting. And I actually found that this widget is a lifesaver, and it's really, really helpful when you're using an Apple Pencil or you're doing any sort of sculpting. So there's a lot here, and you can customize pretty much anything. If you're just getting into Blender, I would recommend not customizing anything. I would say try your best to stick to the default shortcuts for a lot of reasons, but the main one being that any tutorial you go watch, a lot of the shortcuts and everything, you're going to need to follow along with them. And if you change them all from the beginning, you're going to have a hard time learning the basics. So once you get through the basics, if you take this course, once you get through the course, if you then decide like, hey, I want to make this feel like Unreal, or I want to make this feel like Unity or whatever, have at it. But I would say, for the beginning, stick to the shortcuts. Like, I'll give you an example. To move objects around, like you would do WER in most programs, like in Unreal, you click W and move this over. But in Blender, the way you do that is the best way to do it. You can click on this transform here and you can move it that way. But the best way is actually just to press G for get or for grab, and then you can move it around. If you hold that, if you press X, it's going to lock it to the X axis, Z to lock to the Z axis, Y to lock to the Y axis. And you can also do Shift Z to move along the Z axis, so to lock X and Y, or Shift X to move, etc. And then same thing, you might have seen me doing it. I press G. I don't have to keep holding it down. It just sticks to my mouse, which is really helpful, especially my wife's an occupational therapist who deals with hands. And so this is actually a very, she loves this about it. It's better for you. You don't get the repetitive strain injury as much. And the other thing is, say I start to move it and I go, I actually don't want to do that movement. I can just press escape and it goes back to where it was. Let's see. So let's look at these windows real quick. We don't get too far in the weeds here, but these windows it's helpful to know about. You can drag up a new window. If you just hover over the corner of any of these, you can drag up a new part of the window, and then you can change this to be any type of window that you want. And you also have these layout tabs, and by default, these actually I find them to be really helpful. As you get into it, you may choose your own layout. If you have multiple monitors, you probably will end up making your own sort of layout and saving that as a preset. But these layouts are very helpful, and anyone who's used a lot of programs do something similar, but Resolve is the one that comes to my mind of you can do a lot of the same things in any of these workspaces, but it just makes it easier to do those things. For instance, the modeling tab focuses, the 3D viewport is very big. It automatically jumps into edit mode, which is helpful. The sculpting tab automatically goes into sculpting mode. And like the texture painting, it brings up the tools that you need. And again, all of this is customizable, but it's very helpful starting place, if nothing else, to just jump in and do that thing. And you can jump back and forth between these layout, and then let's say you render, and then you go into the compositing tab and you can do your compositing. So the layout tabs are very, very helpful. And you can, like I said, you can also create your own. I've done lots of different things before in the past where I've customized the color and I've changed the windows to be, different. And that's again one of the pros about Blender is you really can kind of change it to do whatever you want. So let's just take a look at let's just look at a few things here. So if I jump into the sculpting tab here, you can see that you can if I just click on the default brush, you can start modifying this very easily. And I'll switch into shading here. So you can do all sorts of sculpting goodness. Let's do this cloth one, because this one's really interesting. I can quickly make this cube look like it's cloth, made out of cloth. And I'm going to switch. Let's just jump into. I had this texture painting mode up earlier, and I'll just go ahead and jump into this too. So, I'm going to add a new material here. I'm going to add an image texture. I'm going to connect this, and I'll just make a new image here, and we'll call this CG Pro. And then I'm going to select that image here. And now I can go ahead and start painting either on the texture itself or directly on the model. And you can do all sorts of, you can do some pretty amazing things with the texture painting. And again, if you have the either a Wacom tablet, or in my case, the Apple Pencil, you can use that, and it's really intuitive to do. And then the shading tab, you have, it's by default, it's, I'm going to take this off so we don't have to look at that, the beautiful painting there. You can do all your texturing here. You can change it to metallic, or whatever you want to do here. Animation tab, I mean, this is, we'll just go into this real briefly. You can quickly add keyframes, and let's just move this over to there and close to here, and bam, we have an animation. I can switch into my shaded mode or my rendered mode. And the other really helpful, if you're just getting into Blender, the function F3, or the F3 button, and you can type in basically anything in Blender. So one of the things I was doing earlier was exploding. So I can add a quick explode and explode this cube that I just made if I want to. So there we go. Let's go ahead. I'm going to look at one add-on that I have enabled here, which is called Traffic Full. And add-ons are a really important part of Blender, and it's one of the things that makes Blender so powerful, because the community sort of builds all these add-ons. There's tens of thousands of add-ons. I would say there's so many of them out there. Some of them are free. In this case, so I have this bus here. I can click a button, and let me press OK. And I have an arrow down here. I didn't quite see what it was. Let's see, spawn asset.
I think it's because your traffic collection's turned off in collections.
Ah, yes, thank you, sir. There we go. So that was one of the ones that I had added earlier. Let's see. Yeah, I turned off the, there we go. There's the bus. And this is this add-on. I just quickly spawned this bus, and it has a rig already attached, so you can already get started on your rigging. And then if I search in this box here, I can do, let me turn off transparency. So you can see I have this the school bus with just a click of a button, and it's ready to be rigged and animated and everything ready to go. So it's just one of hundreds of very useful add-ons. Some add-ons are very technical and do some very specific things. Others are like this, that are more like assets that you can add to your project. And then, so I'll go real quick. Let's see, let me jump into my camera view. Let me move around. Let me find a good view here. So let me go ahead and render this. I'm just going to do F12 to render. I have my exploding monkey too. So now I've rendered this. I could save this out as a file if I wanted to. I can also go into the compositing tab, and you can actually see what I did here. If I turn back on transparency, nope, I need to be in the, turn this back on and we re-render. Now I have this transparent background, and in my compositor, what I've done is I have added a blur to the background. So if I actually just take this, this is what the image looks like with no compositing, right? I have the transparent background. But what I've done is I add the background in, and I've blurred it, and I've taken the exposure down a little bit. So the compositor is actually really powerful, and it's actually very fast. We did a project where we had a very complex Fusion pipeline, and we did end up finishing in Fusion, but we started it in Blender, and when we moved to Fusion, basically doing the exact same things, Blender was probably 10 times faster than what Fusion was. There were just a few things that we wanted to do that Blender's compositor at the time I don't think could do. Now I think it can, and yeah, and then the geometry nodes, we can I do have something I can show you from geometry nodes, but I'll talk about scripting real quick. And this is where I was saying that ChatGPT comes into play, which is with scripting, you can do a ton. So in this example, what I did, all I did was I asked ChatGPT, I think I said, make me an exporter for Blender with FBX and selected objects. And that basically spit out this code right here. And even if you don't know Python, if you've never coded in your life, if you look at this, it's pretty readable. You can see what it says. It says export scene, and then file name. You have your path here. So if you want to set this to a folder, you can do that. And you have all your options here. And what's interesting about this is you could, if you have an Unreal project, for instance, you could actually just set this export path to your content folder in Unreal. And when you export, it will automatically be imported in your Unreal project. And there's a lot of pipeline tricks and tips that we get to in the course. We'll save that for another time. I think my time on going through the basics here is probably coming to an end. But this to me is very exciting because you can, even with no pipeline experience before, if you had no pipeline experience, you can type this in and you have now an actually pretty great pipeline. And there's very little work to it. So there are add-ons. There's the official Unreal or Blender to Unreal. I have my own add-ons that I've built before ChatGPT to do similar things. But it's the use of scripting in Blender is very powerful. And anything you do, if I duplicate this camera, you can actually get the code for it right here in the scripting tab. And anything you do, like if you want to add a cube, that gets brought up here. If you want to destroy that cube, if you want to make it big, so it makes it automating things very easy. It's much easier to do than any other programs. I would say, especially getting started with it, because Maya's language, MEL, however you say it, it's not as easy to just jump in and start doing stuff. So I wouldn't normally say, yeah, jump into the scripting tab, but I think it's easy enough that if you have a task that you do over and over and over again, automating it, especially with ChatGPT now, is a no-brainer.
I had to do a 4-year degree to learn how to do that. It's really annoying that you can now just do it without having to do that.
It is kind of annoying.
More seriously, very, very empowering is what I really meant, and very, very cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So, if you have any more that you want to show, or I know that you also wanted to go through some example projects, and we probably have like another 10 or so minutes to go through some example projects. What you find cool about Blender versus other tools, which you've already kind of hinted at, where Blender excels and how it pairs well with Unreal Engine.
Yeah, that's a great. So, there's a lot. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I think that there's a few amazing things about Blender. The fact that it's free is not a small one. I think when we did this, I'll show this project in a minute. But when let me bring this over so I can see what I'm looking at. When we did this project, I guess it was 2 years ago, but it was 8K. Let's see, it was 8K. It wasn't stereo, 8K mono, but it was 8K 360 footage. And we set up a whole render farm to render it. And the fact that we could just send in unlimited render nodes, essentially, was a huge deal, because those render nodes would have cost a bit of money in most other software, or doing it in the cloud would have cost quite a bit of money. So the fact that it's free is actually pretty impressive for a lot of reasons. The other thing is that I do think in general it has really good import and export options, and they're constantly updating those things. So in terms of a pipeline tool, it's pretty flexible in those terms. I mean, these days it's getting easier and easier in general with things like USD and GLTF and that sort of thing. It's getting easier in general across the board, I would say. But yeah, and then same thing for, like, if you if you need to, a lot of times, sometimes you need to fix UVs if you're doing stuff in Unreal or otherwise. I mean, these days it's almost not because of Nanite, it's a little bit different, but you know, it's a tool that can do just about anything. And the other thing that's very, very powerful about it, that's maybe the most powerful thing about it, is actually the community. Because if you search for anything, you're probably going to find an answer. And that alone makes Blender really powerful, because there's been other software I was trying to learn, and then trying to find information was difficult, and trying to find people who were willing to share their knowledge was difficult. Whereas in Blender, it's kind of the total opposite. People, it's just built around this whole community, and you just meet a few other people, and then you can, I mean, it's just the community is really, really powerful, is what I was trying to get there. Mike, do you have anything to add on that?
I think, you know, first of all, exactly, yeah, the community is incredible. Like the amount of times that like my professional ass has been saved by like Blender Stack Exchange, you know, where I'm like on a tight deadline, don't know what, like hit a roadblock or a problem, chuck something on like the Blender Stack Exchange, and pretty quickly I'll have, you know, people answering and being like, oh, have you tried this? You could do that. So yeah, the community is absolutely fantastic. I think for me, one of the biggest things that I personally love about Blender is, I think it's like I mentioned earlier, that the fact that you can do so much under one software. You know, whereas if you were in a different pipeline where, you know, you'd model something in 3ds Max, you then you know, sculpt it in ZBrush, you texture it in Substance, you know, there's a lot of kind of importing and exporting, just for just doing functions. Whereas with the fact that within Blender you've got, you know, all of these amazing functions like you just showed, but the fact that then they all work together as well, in that like you can sculpt something, you can use the sculpting data to inform your material choices, you can then go back and change that on the fly, you can edit a base mesh while still sculpting over the top of it, you know, and all of these things work together. I think, you know, for me, it's a really, really powerful tool to be able to do, you know, 90% of your entire pipeline in one software. I think, you know, it's such an incredible and powerful tool for being able to do that, because I mean, it saves on time as well. You don't have to keep, you know, reloading projects, or, you know, like you said, if you've got a project in Unreal and you need to edit the UVs, well, you know, I think Unreal, in my opinion, Unreal's UV editing, you know, tools are difficult to say the least. It's just not ideal. So being able to do that, everything in Blender, and then re-export, it saves a lot of time.
Not to mention that your shortcuts and stuff and your navigation and stuff is consistent, as opposed to like if you're going to Substance and you're going to ZBrush and you're going back, and it's like just navigating 3D viewport is frustrating when you have to go bounce between these projects.
100%. I think the other thing as well that you mentioned right at the start is just how customizable Blender is, because it's completely open source. Literally every single tool, you know, every button is completely customizable, you know, and not just from a, you know, UI standpoint, in terms of, you know, changing the colors or the color scheme of the software, etc. But the fact that if you wanted, you could make Blender work exactly like Maya in terms of its hotkeys and its shortcuts. You know, like you've done with Unreal, you know, you've changed it so that the navigation is better for, you know, for you, because you're used to working in Unreal. And also, I think somebody's just put in the chat that, the fact that it doesn't crash every 10 minutes is ideal. You know.
Keenan. How's it going, man? Keenan. It's been a while. We worked on something, I think, together. But he says he's doing Blender now. He was C4D and Max before. But that is a big deal. The fact that it does it's gotten a lot better too. Like it used to be, I would say, not quite as stable. But it seems like I mean, I can't remember the last serious crash that I've had, and it was probably on a project that Mike and I were working on together. We were throwing everything at it. We hadn't
Yeah.
hundreds of buildings, nothing was optimized, vegetation everywhere, and it was kind of it was kind of the and we ended up moving the whole project to render in Unreal. Um, and that's where I feel like, and I've mentioned this before, but that's where like the Blender Unreal pipeline is kind of the best of both worlds, because most programs, not Blender, not just Blender, but most programs have a problem with scaling. You can do a lot of things with, oh, you have 100 assets even, okay, but like you want to add 1,000 assets, you want to have like if you want to everything high poly and 8K textures, most software, including Blender, can't really handle it. Unreal is kind of and Unity, but come on, Unreal is kind of the only software that you can just sort of keep throwing stuff at it, and it's okay. Getting started in it and like bringing your assets in and compiling shaders is painful, but it ingests all that stuff really well. So having a 3D tool like Blender as your DCC and to be able to do whatever geometry stuff you need, and then doing, especially for bigger projects, rendering in Unreal is a really great, it's a great pipeline, and it's one that I think we're going to see a lot of even professional studios. I mean, professional studios are already using it, but even really high end studios, I think, my guess is that a lot of them are going to start moving towards that pipeline in general.
Yeah.
They're definitely allowing use of it, whether it's bound into the pipeline yet. And Maya's got a lot of hooks into the actual pipeline. But as far as being able to produce things and put them into the pipeline, I know that most of the studios I'm aware of are now at least have some people doing that with Blender.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah, speaking of Unreal, I know that you also want to show some example projects that you've worked on, but how do you like working between Blender and Unreal? Like, what's your kind of common go-to practices for exchanging between the two software?
It's a great question. It kind of depends on the project, I would say, and it kind of depends. So, yeah, I think actually, Mike, you probably, even the project we did recently, or we're still working on. Well, we can't really talk about the project itself, but we can talk about buildings and importing and
Yeah.
stuff. What would you say?
I think that the way that we were doing a lot of it was to build the assets in Blender, creating a lot of the pretty much all the assets, modeling, texturing, everything within Blender, and then just exporting them as FBXs. The fact that the exporter that you just showed that you made with ChatGPT, I think that, in fact, having that linked into your content folder, I think that's going to be the way to go. And when we jump back into that project in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, that's something that we need to think about, because I think that's going to massively improve or speed up our pipeline in terms of importing and exporting.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you've got the official Blender to Unreal add-on. In my opinion, though, I think I actually prefer doing it manually, because the Blender to Unreal exporter can be a little bit finicky a couple of times. Like, it won't necessarily export things exactly as you want them. But I really like the way that it is very, very fast to kind of jump between things. I mean, I mentioned earlier about UV unwrapping. We had this exact issue on one of those buildings where all of the UVs were, just completely off, and the bricks on them looked awful and terrible. And it was really quick to be able to just go back into Blender, reopen the Blender file that had that building in it, correct the UVs in Blender, re-export it, update it in Unreal, and within 5 minutes of everything compiling, it was all completely done. And it was a really easy way to switch between the two of them. I do think that there's something to be said for if you have a proper kind of Blender to Unreal pipeline where you know that you're going to be ending up in Unreal. It can be a bit of a difference as to whether or not you even bother doing materials in Blender, or whether or not you just use material instances and do everything in Unreal instead, because if you're going to end up there anyway, what's the point? So
I think to add on to that, I think it kind of depends on your if you have a team, it depends on what your skill level is in Unreal versus Blender. When I was just getting into Unreal, when I was seriously getting into Unreal a few years ago, I was very familiar with Blender, and I knew how to bake textures. I knew how to bake lighting. Even I knew all the stuff in Blender, and I didn't really know how to do much in Unreal. And in that case, I think doing as much in Blender was really great because I understood the pipe. I could just make the pipeline, and like I would use GLTF. Actually, was a great format for getting things in because we come in with the exact same scale, the right material set up, and everything. And another one that what I did. This is probably no, it's probably 3 or 4 years ago. It was a while back. We'll just say was using USD Stage in Unreal, so you can actually use a special version of Blender through NVIDIA Omniverse that exports USD, and what was interesting is you could do your entire layout and everything basically in Blender, and then use the USD Stage in Unreal. And basically, if you want to move objects instead of using Unreal, you just do it in Blender, and then you export and re-import, and it'll do it pretty much live. And it was actually a really great. It was a very simple thing that I was doing, so it actually worked out really well. I wouldn't recommend that on big projects. If you have a few things you want to do in Unreal, if you have like a pretty simple model, that pipeline can actually be pretty interesting. And but FBX is still kind of king with Unreal. I think it's just more developed on the Unreal side, and you have a lot more options. And when you import, when you re-import, you have a lot of options to choose, between, whatever. So I look forward to the day when everything is just USD and it all just works perfectly. But so far it's not, at least on the Blender side, it's not quite there.
Yeah, it does definitely relies on implementation in everywhere you're going to go. So yeah, that's catching up. I've been poking USD since 2016, I think, and it's still going. But amazing, and it has a bright future. So I know you want to show a few examples. I also want to make sure we got some time for the Q&A. Sure. Everyone out there, if you have questions, please get those questions coming in, because we want to make sure that we answer them if you have them. Feel free to send them in at any point. And yeah, if you want to show a couple of examples, and then we'll get to the talking about the course as well.
Yep. You want to share my screen?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So we use Blender on pretty much, it seems like every project we do at Lightsail, even if they're video projects that have nothing to do with 3D, we'll use it for previs or for blocking. A lot of times we'll do I'll do photogrammetry and basically use it for scouting, virtual scouting, and it's faster and easier than using Unreal for a lot of things. But I chose this particular project to show because this one was one we did about 2 years ago for Meta, and there's 4 different scenes. There's a beach scene, a forest scene, a mountain scene, and a desert scene. And this is an interesting project because we basically did everything in Blender. So we let me start here. So there's we have, you can, if I zoom in here, you can see there's trees moving, but everything is except for the actor, and the yoga mat is all CG. It's all done in Blender. And so we have, like I said, we have some basic animation, some animations of trees moving and wind blowing. You saw earlier probably the butterflies. We did some of this stuff through compositing tricks, like I said, through Fusion. But even before we moved the pipeline to Fusion, everything was working fine with Blender's compositor. There was one or two things that we really wanted in Fusion that Blender didn't have at the time. But it's interesting to note, because even today, if I had to do this again, because it's 360, I would still use Blender. I would not use Unreal. Unreal does not have a great way of exporting 360 video, or even 360 photos. And and especially if you want something like path tracing, actual lighting from path tracing, Blender is still, it's much easier to get that in Blender. This is another example. Let me see. Let me go back to 4K and press play. So this is the beach scene, and if I zoom in, it's probably hard to see through the screen share, but the waves are moving, and this is I've simulated the ocean and rendered it out, which was probably overkill. Like looking back, it's like that could have been just a video file that we just overlaid, but I think there was just part of me that was like, I want to render an ocean, so I did. And it's probably, again, also probably something hard that you probably can't tell on your screen, but there is some heat wave, some heat distortion that's happening. And then some of these assets are like this GPLA. This is photogrammetry that I did. And actually most of this Venice Beach stuff, all the graffiti stuff here, these are photogrammetry. In fact, I actually don't even think they're photogrammetry. These are photos. Even this one is a still photo that I took, and then used images as planes. I'm sure Mike knows what that's all about. And then even though it was a plane, I was able to get the correct shadows and everything else on it. So that was pretty interesting. There are some basic animations in this one as well. There's like a plane flying back here. There's a bird. Again, it's probably hard to see, but all this was done in Blender, except for like the heat things. I think this was done in Fusion, the heat dispersion. You can do that in Blender, but we did that in otherwise. And then the other one was kind of funny too, because we went from kind of photo real, and the client just kept going more and more extreme with it, where they're like more of like a fantasy world, which is cool. I mean, this one is like super saturated. So for my looks, I feel like it's a little over the top, but it did get the point across of like, this is a place that we could not have gotten to in one day. And that was the last thing I'll say about this project, was that we actually were going to pass on this project because they wanted to shoot it all live. They wanted to, in LA, we're going to go shoot a mountain, a desert, a beach, and a forest scene. And we gave them the budget, and they're like, well, it's out of the budget. And then I said, well, why don't we do it all CG? And so we shot the green screen all in one day, the actors out all in one day, and then spent some time to get the CG environments right. But all of this was done through Blender. And yeah, we can move on to the next part if you want, Ed.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Some really cool examples there, and great to see what Blender can do, what it is capable of doing, and all the way through the whole pipeline. It's amazing. I've even tried using it as video editor and all sorts of things in there that it's capable of. Very, very cool. Okay, so let me swap screens here for a second. So we are now just going to go into the course presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about CG Pro's Blender course, and we will have a Q&A after that. So I know there's a couple of questions that we have here. Please stick around for a few minutes, and we'll get back to the Q&A after we've gone through this. So just a minute on what is CG Pro. As this says, we're an online independent live training center, and we specialize in high-end CG training. We do it all live, all remotely, so that you can take the courses from anywhere. We focus on cutting-edge tools and techniques. We do a lot of Unreal Engine training. We're Unreal Authorized Training Center, the first in the world to do the Connectors program with Epic Games. But we also do Blender training, Houdini training, training other software, and industries vary from media and entertainment, the film industry, and we also teach other industries. We recently did some training for NASA and one of their big contractors, Metex, and we do private and custom trainings to that point. We do a lot of public training, public classes, and we also do some placement and consulting. So what we really are is a thriving community, and we also teach high-end computer graphics. So that said, we now have a Blender course, and we have these two wonderful instructors, Alex and Mike, who are experts in Blender and teachers. And yeah, I just wanted to take a minute here to talk about the course before we talk about how you could sign up if you're interested in it. So you guys want to just walk through what the course is and the curriculum.
Sure. Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, I can start this. So what we're going to do is we're going to be basically taking you guys through, the entire pipeline of pretty much everything that, well, most things that you can do in Blender. There's going to be a lot of things that we won't cover, but we're going to be starting with an introduction to Blender, and very much what Alex was doing at the start of this, talking through all of the different tabs, how everything works. The first week is going to be very much focused on how Blender works, what all of the different parts of it are, and how the UI works and all of that. The weeks 2 and 3 are going to be very much focused on modeling, and including using geometry nodes. I know that a lot of people are quite excited about how geometry nodes works, and it can be quite confusing. But we're going to be jumping in on that as well. We'll also be covering rigging and animation, and how to set up rigs, both organic and mechanical rigs, and working on creating animations. We're going to be covering materials and setting up all of the how the shader editor works. We're going to be doing a real deep dive into Blender's material shader, both using PBR materials and also the procedural way of using Blender's like procedural tools for creating that, as well as lighting. And then 7 and 8, we're going to be covering the kind of the pipeline really for using Unreal Engine. I think there's might be Alex, we're going to cover virtual production in this as well, aren't we? I don't know if that's
Yeah. So we have access to I have access to an LED stage as well. I have different ones, and depending on when we're going to do it, we have access to a specific stage, so we can do that. But the other thing, and the thing Mike specifically talking about, is I've actually created what I think is the actual first virtual production pipeline with Blender, like using Blender EV straight to an LED wall. I don't know that really makes sense, or otherwise I'd be screaming it from the rooftop. But I do think it's interesting to look at, and especially as EV's, I think, about to have a big revamp. So if EV is ever close to Unreal in terms of quality and other things, it could be an interesting pipeline. But we certainly will, and especially in the evening courses, we're going to get into some pretty wild topics because I won't be able to help myself. So the other thing I'll mention here is that we're going to be doing, week 1, you'll present to us what project you would like to work on, and that project can really be anything. We were first looking at, we should make like a spaceship or whatever. The project can be anything. If you're interested in doing environments and you want to do everything in Blender and render in Blender, that's fine. Like we can help you, walk you through that sort of pipeline, and vice versa. If you're like, hey, I want to bring in, I want to do this car rig, and I want to bring in Unreal, and I want to figure out how to do these other things. We're going to help mentor you on those. Whatever your project is, we're gonna help you figure that out and talk through that. So I think that's actually another really cool thing about this, that we have some real interesting. We can give direct feedback on your projects as we go through this. Yeah. So
I think it's the difference between watching a tutorial and having a tutor.
Yeah,
I think is the difference here. That there's a lot of the kind of stuff that we'll be covering. Yes, you can access tutorials like this for free on YouTube. Of course you can. There's a lot of them, but what one of the real benefits of CG Pro in general and of this Blender course is going to be the fact that you're going to have 50 plus hours of like actual screen time effectively with both me and Alex, where if there's any questions that you have, any projects that you're working on, we'll be able to give you direct one-to-one feedback on what you're doing, how to work, how it can work.
Yeah, it's a great point, and really where people tend to come to us is when they've got frustrated with learning themselves online and they want that direct mentorship. And it is exactly what I did 15 years ago when I got into the visual effects industry. I'd been learning from, I'm going to date myself here, books. Yes, books. They used to exist. They had made a paper, and we used to read them. People don't read anymore. I know. Use Chat GPT. We used to use books. I learned from books and DVDs, and it was very fun and great and interesting, but I wanted to take it up a level. And when I did a course, much like the ones we do now, and that's what made all the difference. And within not very long after finishing the course, I was working on a Harry Potter movie, and the rest is history. And that's really what we've modeled here at CG Pro and why we do this live. So I want to take a second here. Thank you guys for going through the content in the course. I just want to take a second to talk about what the course looks like. So it's 8 weeks. There is a certificate. We issue certificates. As long as you complete the project, you will get a certificate. It's all taught live. We have mentoring and lab in addition to classes. And there's also an offline forum for support throughout the week, in addition to the live sessions. So twice a week, we have those live sessions. The next start date is July 16th. As the guys said, it is project-based, so you can build something great throughout the 8 weeks. You use this time to really dig into the thing that you want to create. If you're already working on something, you can bring it in here and work on that. If you are looking to get into the industry, we can give you some advice on what to create for your show reel, if that's what you're trying to do, if you're trying to get a job. People take this for a variety of different reasons, but whatever your outcome is, we'll support you in achieving that outcome. And we're a very interactive school, so we want to find out what you want to get out of this and help you through that. All the recordings are available after the course is finished, and you get access to these guys, these amazing instructors. We also have industry guests that come and join us for these courses, to be announced, but we usually get some pretty awesome folks come and join us in these courses. You also get access to an amazing community here at CG Pro, and we're very active. We help after the courses are over, so you get to be a part of that. The first round of this is the first time we've run it. We're giving a discount. The course is usually $4,000 US. We're giving a first round discount of 500 off, so it's be $3,500 US for this 8-week live interactive training. But in addition to that, we're also giving an early bird discount for an additional 350 off. This is something we've never done before, but we're very happy that we're able to do this round. We're only going to do this round. Regular price is going to go back up to 4,000, but for now you can get all of this for just over 3,000. So this discount is going to last. The first run discount will continue until the course runs, but the early bird discount, which again we have not done before, so this is going to last until June 15th. So if another couple of days left on that discount as well. So if anyone's interested in signing up, there should have been some links going out there already in the various chats. Please feel free to sign up if that was enough information for you. You can also get in touch with us if you want to find out anything more about the course. But yeah, that said, that's the offer. We now want to bring this back to Q&A, unless you guys have anything else in addition to add about the course. Then let us.
Yeah, I think we can do Q&A.
Yeah.
Let's do Q&A. So yeah, everybody who's still here, feel free to send more questions in about Blender or anything that we've gone through. I know that we have one question here. Somebody says, what are your top 5 best paid plugins that you could not do without? Great question.
Yeah, we can share my screen again if you want. In fact, let me move this back over here, because I think it's a great question. I think it's actually really important to chat about this as well for anyone who's using Blender. So this is blendermarket.com. This is kind of like the main place you would buy add-ons, and what you can do is you can go to all products, and then you can actually search by most sales, and typically you're going to find the most popular ones here. Some of these are because they're free, so like this one is probably the top one because it's free. But it really depends on what you're doing. So like Auto Rig Pro, for instance, if you're doing a lot of rigging, it's a great add-on. For me, if Botanic, actually anything by this company, Polygon IQ, I'm not sure how you say it, but they do some really good stuff. The car thing I think was that I showed earlier was from them. And I'll just show a few of mine here. Depending on what you're doing, Retopiflow is great. Geoscatter is amazing. But for me, Simple Bake is one that I, especially for a long time, is one I couldn't do without. Like any kind of baking to PBR textures, baking lighting, baking down. Also UV Packmaster, if you're doing any sort of UV work, this one's actually is also really, really great. But I would go through here, and if you're not sure, I would go through here and look at what they have here and go from there. What about you, Mike? What do you have 5?
I think the couple for me that are really essential. Hard Ops is fantastic for hard surface modeling. Is absolutely box cutter is incredible. The UV Packmaster you've already mentioned. It's again fantastic for UV mapping. The one as well that I really, really love that I try to shout about quite a lot is called Photographer.
Oh yeah.
Which is brilliant for I was probably going to come up with a load of assets.
Yeah.
Hang on, I'll see if I can find it. Maybe. Photographer is absolutely fantastic. It basically allows you to use the 3D camera in the same way with the same settings that you would do a real camera. So you can set your ISO values, you can set your shutter speed, and it basically really allows you to hone in on lighting for rendering in a way that Blender's just native like gamma and exposure settings just don't. You've really got to be very very picky about it. Alex, I'm just going to send you this on Slack. I don't know if you'll be able to then just pull it up.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Yeah,
I can do that.
Because it's on Gumroad.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really, really enjoyable. It's incredible for being able to really hone in on getting your lighting correct. The amount of feedback that I get from people online whenever I post projects, that it's like, how did you get that to look so photoreal? And it's a big part of that is the lighting, and being able to really control pretty much everything for your lighting.
Yeah,
there's a lot of settings that you can use.
Yeah. I also was going to share some of the add-ons that I made earlier. That was one of the things I was going to show. I just didn't get to it. But I have made some of my own add-ons, and it's actually pretty easy to make your own, especially with ChatGPT. But there's another one called Serpens. This is one I would say I could not do without. It's kind of like to make add-ons with visual scripting. So it's kind of like blueprints, but you can quickly make your own add-ons this way, and that's one I could do. I could not do without. I don't think. That's a good one. So yeah, there's so many of them. It just depends on what you want to do. Like literally, like I was saying, there's logo tracer, but also like Lego. There's like things you can do with Legos, and like really Brickify. That's the one I think. There's so many great ones that it'd be hard to name 5. There was another question that was, what sorcery is this?
That's my
I don't think I
question.
can answer that one, but that one is a good question. Someone actually, I will clarify. Yeah, virtual production with Eevee, it is a thing. You can do that. You have to use Assimilate Live Effects, which is the software I use. And one of the limitations is that you have to use an older version of Blender. I forget, it's like 3.1 currently is the implementation that I found that worked. But it is possible to render Eevee in real time and then use live effects to do all the camera tracking and everything else. I don't think, I mean, for Eevee to run in real time is tricky. Like even with a pretty simple scene, it doesn't really run at 24 frames or more for in general. I don't really know Eevee that well, so maybe there are ways of really making it work. But I think the promise is what I'm really interested in, and the idea that, you know, if especially if Eevee becomes much better and much faster, which I think it will, I think it could be a very interesting pipeline, because it's much in general. I would say it's much faster and easier to get set up in Blender than it is in Unreal. So, you know, if you had a virtual production pipeline with Blender, I think it could be pretty interesting. So I'm definitely happy to explore it more. You know, in the class, we probably will do one of the Tuesday evenings. I probably will just do that. But happy to chat more about that offline as well.
It's a good question as well. Also worth noting that while virtual production tends towards the LED wall in terms of its PR, I guess, like people tend to point towards that use case in terms of virtual production. Really, the way that the industry explains virtual production is everything all the way from pre-production and visualization all the way
Right.
through production, assisting, ICV effects, post-production, essentially really is production, but it is a new way of doing it, and it encompasses a lot of different methods and tools. So I think where Blender really shines, in addition to its potential future in doing real-time effects for walls, is in being able to assist in all of the other aspects of virtual production, being able to create for visualizations in all of the earlier stages of virtual production. And its accompaniment with Unreal Engine, I think, is very interesting. A lot of the people in our community have taken Unreal classes and courses with us to do virtual production, but there are limits to what Unreal can do, and this is where really I think adding this to your tool belt is something that's what I want to use it for myself, having been a Maya person for most of my career. Now we all need a DCC to accompany Unreal Engine. It's still, whilst it has modeling tools and some UV capabilities, they're rudimentary, very rudimentary, and being able to have a DCC that is an accompaniment to that for doing the things that Unreal's not good at yet, I think is really worth underscoring. And what this class really aims to be is both something that's a standalone Blender course, that if you just use Blender and you want to achieve great photorealistic ray traced renders in that one software in Blender, then it's absolutely about that. But it's also about being a companion to Unreal Engine, being able to make things and put them in there to use Unreal as the renderer. There was another question that kind of segues into somebody asking, will you be able to get into character rigging during the course? And I know that yes is the answer, but I'm going to add some detail.
Yeah, I mean, we're still kind of finalising the exact syllabus for every week, and we're still going through and just working out, you know, the exact running of each week and what we're going to be covering, you know, like minute to minute sort of thing. But yeah, we will be covering. There is an entire week dedicated to rigging. That's going to be both kind of organic character rigging and also a bit more kind of like mechanical style rigging as well. But yeah, the short answer to that is yes. You know, we will get into character rigging, which will include probably, Alex, again, I think we were talking about this the other day, but that'll probably include things like IK chains, setting up kind of like IK targets for, you know, kind of dynamic hand and feet movement. We'll probably also cover kind of binding for clothing and being able to kind of like properly like vertex bind stuff. So yeah, we will be going into doing a bit of a deep dive into that.
That's great.
Alex, you got anything to add to
I yes, not really. It's like a politician answer. It's like a politician answer. It's like, yeah, character rigging. Let's talk about geometry nodes. There's one thing that we didn't really talk about geometry nodes, but I do think it's important to bring up that is definitely also something we're going to talk about. And Mike is
Yes.
a wizard at geometry nodes, and geometry nodes is very, very powerful, and will continue to be extremely powerful. And what Keenan brought up is that Blender needs a solid particle system.
Well, there's an interesting thing on that. I don't know if you've seen this, but particle nodes is coming. It's going to pretty much turn Blender's geometry and particle node systems into a kind of Houdini light. It's the examples that I've seen so far are incredibly powerful, and it's only going to get better. I think one of the things that I've talked about already quite a bit is that one of the things that I love about Blender is being able to do all of these things in one program, and the fact that now with particle nodes coming means that you've pretty much got kind of a system of Maya, ZBrush, Substance Painter, Houdini, all of those in one package. I mean, I wouldn't say that Blender is as good as any of those. Well, 3D Studio Max, yes, but certainly not ZBrush, Substance, or Houdini, obviously. But the fact that you can those will be coming and the features will be being added is incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
that's very exciting to see. The power of Houdini is undeniable, and starting to see some of those things creep into Blender is definitely very exciting. So we got through all the questions. Any more questions out there in the audience? Feel free to drop them in. But I think we've got to most of them. Anything else that you guys want to share before we wrap?
No, I think pretty good.
No,
All
yeah,
right.
I'm looking forward to the class. Looking forward to working with CG Pro. And yeah, it's Blender changes so fast that it's like even between now and then there'll probably be some new release with a bunch of new features that we'll have to incorporate. But no, I'm real excited to be teaching this course.
Yeah, same.
Amazing. Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you both for your time this evening. Thanks for being a part of this and sharing your experience and your wisdom with the community. Thank you, everybody out there, for joining us tonight. Thank you for asking great questions and being a part of this as well. If you enjoyed what you saw tonight and you're interested in joining us for the course, we would love to work with you. I look forward to it myself. And yeah, as I said, we've got a great offer on this one. This is not, I know, sound like I'm putting my sales hat on, but this is not a typical offer that we do in terms of the price here. So this is a great opportunity to jump in on this one. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you so much again, and look forward to working with you two both as well. And yeah, thank you everyone again. It's been an enjoyable evening, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Okay.